6 things that make women run away when they're getting to know a man, meaning in the early stages, whether it's the first date or just the initial phase of getting to know each other, the first few times you meet, okay? Specifically the very beginning stages. The ones who run away immediately are the healthiest women. And honestly, I don't even know if healthy women exist. They're like unicorns. Understanding why these 6 things are done and then starting to work on fixing these behaviors a bit, in my opinion, is a smart move. A woman who sees a man who only thinks about himself, who just wants to take and doesn't care about her well-being too, will distance herself. Even the dependent type can be spotted from the very first dates, by the way he acts, the way he talks, the way he behaves. In some way, the other person senses it. Whenever something happens, you have some responsibility, whether a lot or a little in some way. My name is Daniela Coin. I am a professional educator, and I have worked for many years with men in the field of relationships. So I help men get to know themselves better and understand how to relate better with women. 6 things that make a woman you've just met run away. Let's clarify that the ones who leave right away as soon as they start to notice these things I'm about to tell you, those of you who know me know I'm all about disclaimers, so let's start with that. The ones who leave immediately, just as soon as they see even a few not so great signs, are the healthiest women. I'm not saying completely healthy women, because honestly, I don't even know if truly healthy women exist. They're like unicorns. Nobody really knows if they exist. But women who are fairly healthy, or at least a bit healthier. So what do I mean by a healthy woman? That's someone who is on a personal growth journey in her life, working on self-discovery, aiming to feel better about herself and to have healthier relationships. So those who are a bit more independent, a bit more balanced, when they see a man doing these 6 things I'm about to mention, they usually distance themselves, and they do it pretty quickly. So when a woman runs away quickly, it's probably because you've done one of these things, almost certainly, I'd say. On the other hand, those who are a bit less healthy still end up leaving, but they do it later. Then there are those who aren't exactly healthy, but aren't all that unhealthy either. They're not that unbalanced. They still end up leaving, but it takes them a bit longer to realize it, or a bit more time to decide to walk away. Meanwhile, there are also women who stay even when there are dysfunctional patterns in the relationship. And those who stay are usually the ones who, let's say, aren't healthy, or are in any case quite unhealthy, very unhealthy. And unfortunately, guys, these are the women who in some way end up making your life impossible, who make you live through a relationship hell more or less right from the start, except for the first 2 or 3 months when you kind of get carried away with sex and nonsense. And then basically the relationship starts to crack and the conflicts begin. But those women, the unhealthy ones, the ones who are a bit less balanced, often stay in those dramatic, conflict-ridden relationships. And they stay for a long time, sometimes for years, unfortunately, sometimes for far too many years, with kids and everything else getting caught up in it. And obviously, you end up more or less physically in a madhouse. There are people who, from time to time, even end up stabbing each other or, unfortunately, seriously hurting themselves. And when they don't seriously hurt themselves, they can seriously harm their children, or in any case, end up living a miserable life. So, understanding why these 6 things are done, which I'm about to start telling you, and then also beginning to work on fixing these behaviors a bit, in my opinion, is a smart thing to do. At least that's what I think. But of course, you can do whatever you prefer. So the first thing that makes a woman run away, and this is always a broad topic, is a lack of self-care. And by lack of self-care, I don't just mean on a physical or aesthetic level, like someone who maybe doesn't eat well, doesn't have a nice body, doesn't wash, doesn't dress well, doesn't comb their hair, or doesn't take care of their appearance. Self-care isn't just about outward appearance, but it's also, and above all, an inner aspect. So, for example, we would say that a person lacks self-care, not only if they do those outward things I just mentioned, but also if, for instance, they don't cultivate their mind, intelligence, reading, they don't enrich themselves, they don't work to stimulate their curiosity, to, let's say, broaden their horizons. And we would also say that a person lacks self-care when they don't make an effort to create or find a work environment or even a circle of friends that is pleasant, satisfying, and fulfilling. And you might say, well, yes, but finding a job isn't easy. You have to take what you can get. Yes and no. I mean, there's a way to take what comes your way, but there's also a way to work on and develop something that's better, more fulfilling, of course. So taking care of yourself also means making an effort to create a work, social, and friendship environment that is fulfilling, pleasant, rich, interesting, a place where you actually enjoy being. And taking care of yourself ultimately also and above all means listening to yourself and understanding what your passions are, your callings, the things you truly enjoy and the things you don't. And nurturing the things that are good for you, that are good for your heart, that fuel your creativity, that make you feel good and have fun and also create that wonderful, fulfilling feeling, so to speak. And instead, to distance yourself as much as possible from those situations that aren't so pleasant and fulfilling, satisfying, or creative, that don't nourish, let's say, the soul of the person. Okay? So this broad topic of not taking care of oneself really covers everything. It's holistic, we might say, right? Let's move on to number 2. This is what we could call egocentrism, narcissism. Let's call it that. That is, all those people, both men and women, though psychology seems to have identified a higher prevalence among men for this kind of attitude, even if usually those who are more egocentric or narcissistic don't question themselves in psychological contexts or in personal growth. But there are many of them. And when a man consistently tends to be very self-centered or even has narcissistic tendencies, which can be quite off-putting, well, the woman, without a doubt, is definitely going to notice it. Let's clarify for those who don't know. Egocentric people, or narcissists in general, are those who obviously prioritize themselves. So for them, their own well-being comes first. And basically they care very little, if at all, about others. They're only interested in others to the extent that others can provide them with something, okay? They have to be there to worship them, seek them out, thank them, love them, care for them, and so on and so forth. So basically, yes, now you might say, yes, my ex was like that too. Yes, I've met a lot of women like that as well. Yes, there are many women, especially in this group and in general, in all environments where there are men who are into personal growth, especially in the area of relationships. These are people who are not narcissistic or egocentric. They tend to be more open, sensitive, sometimes even a bit dependent. And so they usually end up finding a counterpart who is a bit more egocentric or narcissistic. So now many will say, yes, I found my ex to be narcissistic, egocentric, blah, blah, blah. That's normal. This does not mean that all women are narcissistic. However, I wanted to explain a woman who sees a man who only thinks about himself and doesn't also care about her well-being, about sharing love and affection, about being supportive, about being understanding with his partner, who only wants to be worshipped, enriched, idolized in some cases by his partner, while she, so to speak, counts for little or nothing. In short, a woman who realizes this will very easily, if she is reasonably healthy, be a woman who distances herself. Why? Because a relationship at its core is something beautiful if it is shared. So sharing yourself in a safe environment, a loving environment, is the foundation of a relationship. And usually egocentric people, narcissists, or those with narcissistic tendencies are unable to do this. It's not that they are bad people. Even if you have encountered women like this, they are not bad people. They are simply people who in their lives have not had the opportunity, so to speak, to develop this kind of awareness, empathy, or ability to share. They have closed themselves off, and their way of responding to a lack of love has been to say, okay, now I'll become egocentric and you all have to give me everything. If you don't give me what I need, I'll push you away. Okay, this is roughly speaking and explained in a very simple way how it works. And so consequently, I repeat, a healthy woman will see this kind of behavior, understand that there's no possibility of building a relationship in the future, and will walk away. It happened to me years ago. I went on a date and it was blatantly obvious that the person in front of me was this type. And even though he was a very handsome guy and we had a lot of interests in common and so on, I still said no, because it's absolutely impossible to build any kind of future with a person like that. So there's no point in wasting my time. Obviously, even if women do it, it's wrong. But guys, here I'm talking to men, so I'm addressing men and clearly referring to women, right? If I were talking to women, I'd say the same things, but from the opposite perspective, of course. Point number 3, the opposite, emotional dependency, or the tendency toward emotional dependency. Everything that has to do with instead being too dependent on the other person. That is, the egocentric person says, no, I am the center of my world and you have to give to me, you have to worship me, you have to understand me, you have to love me. And if you don't love me, you're bad, you're all awful. And the dependent person, on the other hand, or someone who has a tendency toward dependence, does the opposite. They say, yes, I give you everything. They say to their partner, I give you everything. I love you. I adore you. I'll do anything you want. The important thing is that you don't leave me. The important thing is that you stay with me. And so the center of the dependent person's world is their partner. The partner is the person on whom the dependent in some way relies. And the dependent person usually has either flame X or flame Y or flame Z and moves from one to another, seeing which one gives more, which one they can get the most from. The dependent person also says, if you don't give to me, you're bad. The only difference is that the narcissist says, if you don't love me, you're bad, so screw you. Whereas the dependent person says, if you don't love me, it's not fair. It's not fair. You have to love me. Now I have to do something to make you love me. And so they give. And this thing, whether it's emotional dependency or egocentrism, narcissism, both are things you can notice even from the very first dates, especially the egocentric narcissistic side, but you can also spot the dependent side. It can be seen from the first dates by the way they act, the way they talk, the way they behave. These are things we've explained in detail in our courses. There are a whole series of verbal and nonverbal behaviors that really identify this type of personality. And the dependent person might even be able to hide their dependency a bit at the beginning during the first date and the initial exchanges. It's possible. But usually in the first few weeks of interaction, especially if the other person gets a little closer or shows some interest, the dependent person collapses and becomes that person who seeks a lot of attention, who maybe gets anxious waiting for a text message, who replies immediately, who gets offended if the other person doesn't do what they expect them to do, who asks for a lot, who calls, who does a whole series of things that make the other person think, what kind of movie is this person playing in? What movie are they watching at the theater? Are we in two different theaters? Because clearly I've just met you, I'm still trying to figure out if I like you, and you're already at the end credits of the movie. One person is still watching the opening scenes, trying to figure out what the movie is about, while the other has already finished the film and is reading the credits. So this happens to employees and people notice it. Men do this too, and when a woman sees a man like that, she thinks, maybe this guy isn't really all that focused. Now, a few days ago, I published a video, let me make a quick aside, where I also explained that there are, let's say, some differences between a narcissist, or rather a person with narcissistic tendencies, and a dependent person. And I explained that when a woman has to choose a man, because everyone says, why do women go for the jerk? Why do they prefer jerks instead of the good, sweet, cuddly, nice, polite, decent, present, supportive guy, and so on and so forth? So there are many different reasons for this, but one of the main reasons is simply that the dependent person is completely thrown off balance, so they're not centered at all. Whereas the narcissist, even if it's for unhealthy or problematic reasons, is still, in a sense, centered and focused on themselves. They're too centered. They shut out the world, the planet, and everyone around them. So that's not healthy either. But certainly from some points of view, in terms of being centered, it's a bit healthier. The person with narcissistic or selfish tendencies is somewhat better off than the dependent one, because the dependent person is not in touch with themselves. They don't know who they are. They don't know what they want. Their whole universe revolves around their partner. And usually a woman wants to feel that the man is centered because she wants someone who can support and stand by her in case she ever has a moment of weakness. And so here is one of the reasons why women prefer jerks. Even though there are other reasons as well, because obviously there are cognitive biases at play that make a woman believe that a narcissistic, egocentric man is strong. There are also family traumas, so someone who has grown used to loving or having an unhealthy loving relationship within the family, with narcissistic parents, for example, or will more easily fall in love with narcissistic and jerk-like people, and so on. There are many reasons, but one of them is the one I just explained to you, and I really wanted to clarify it. Point number 4, a woman runs away when a man shows demands and control. Demands and control can be exhibited by both narcissists and dependents. To refer back to the previous points, but even people who don't have a tendency toward narcissism or dependency can in some way display demands and control. So what are demands for control? They can also be things that aren't necessarily visible. Often they are. Demands for control are when people, perhaps in a passive or aggressive way, get offended and signal to their partner that there is some kind of shortcoming on the partner's part, because they expected that person to act a certain way, and they want and demand that their partner does exactly what they have decided. So they control, often manipulate, and actually create manipulations based on guilt, inconsistent communication, or the silent treatment, which means when they don't talk to you, don't respond, don't read your messages if, for example, you've done something wrong. So all of these are in some way punitive actions that conceal a demand. They are mechanisms of control and attempts at manipulation on the part of let's also add the word manipulation, which we hadn't included yet, on the part of the person who is expecting something. So if you act with mechanisms like these, even if they don't necessarily seem so obvious, or sometimes, guys, it even happens if you don't show them outwardly, but you have them inside, because in some way, on a subtle level, this kind of attitude comes through, especially for women who are particularly sensitive and perceptive. So if in some way you have expectations toward the other person and you exercise control or manipulation because you want reality to turn out the way you want that person to do what you want, in some way the other person senses it. They might sense it right away, they might sense it after a while, or in some cases, if they're not very sensitive, they might not sense it at all, but sooner or later they will notice. If the demands are obviously blatant, very well in some way showy, with particularly intrusive displays, usually even women who are a bit less healthy notice and distance themselves. If instead they are subtle things, particular manipulations that are not very obvious, then in those cases it can often take a person a bit longer to realize it. But in some cases, it can even be enough. In some cases, I can tell you from my experience, just a few exchanges of messages can be enough. So exchanges of messages, I mean, let's say I'm texting with someone, maybe this person sends me a message, and maybe even people who have never met in person, people you met online, on a dating app or on Facebook, Instagram, wherever. And maybe you don't reply for half a day because you have your own things to do. And the other person says, "Oh, have you disappeared? Are you lost? Oh, what are you doing? Oh, you didn't even find the time to reply to me?" Even silly things like this are super toxic. People will just leave, okay? So when you say, "Oh, well, like earlier I read a comment that said, but those people don't even talk to me, or they run away right away." Well, yes, but you can't exempt yourself from the outcome of anything. Whenever something happens, you have a responsibility, whether it's big or small in some way, even in how people react when they come near you. Okay? And it's right that you know this. So anything that has to do with an expectation, even if it's unconscious, not expressed, or any attempt at control or manipulation toward the woman you're getting to know, the healthier she is, the sooner she'll run away from it. The less healthy she is, the later she'll run away. Or there are also women who don't notice it and think that a relationship is supposed to be like that. But obviously, what kind of relationship are you building on the basis of expectations, control, and manipulation? Question mark. I don't think that's a very, very healthy relationship. Point number 5. Point number 5 that makes a woman run away, whether you tell her or not, because this is also one of those things that somehow gets picked up on, is, drum roll, unresolved issues with other people, with other women in this case. So if you go out hunting or you meet someone and start going out with them, but you have unresolved issues with other people, you're still in love with your ex, you're in love with someone else, but she doesn't care about you, so you want someone else. Or I don't know, you're still in love with your elementary school desk mate. Well, on the other side, whether you say it or not, though usually people rarely say it, even if you don't say it, the other person will sense that there's something creating friction, something that keeps the relationship from flowing smoothly, okay? And as a result, they will definitely notice it and feel less involved, less motivated, less enthusiastic, less desired. And so consequently, that chemistry won't develop. That subtle substance that binds two people, that brings them close enough to truly give themselves to each other. So No kind of serious dating or relationship will start, just to be clear. Can you talk about exes? You can talk about exes. It depends on how you talk about them and the reasons why you bring them up. But if you're on a first date and you're just getting to know someone and you start talking about your exes, absolutely not. Even if you want to speak badly, say nasty things and so on, because it's clear that if you start talking about an ex one way or another, there's still something unresolved, which is understandable since someone might have fears, suspicions, and so on. But it's obvious that this will in some way affect the relationship. Point number 6. Something that makes a woman run away during the getting to know each other phase is, for whatever reasons, which we don't need to get into here, though we could mention a few, but there could be 1,001, a feeling of indecision. I don't know if I like this person. I don't know if I want her. I don't know how much I like her. I don't know when I like her, if I like her, how long it will take me to start liking her, blah, blah, blah. Or an emotional shutdown that can be caused by some kind of fear, by an inability to open up. So maybe I've never been used to opening up emotionally or affectionately. I don't know how to do it. And so I'll be emotionally closed off. Or I'm distrustful because I was taught to be distrustful. I grew up in an environment where everyone was distrustful, blah, blah, blah. And so I'll be closed off. I won't have an attitude or show any sign of trust toward the other person. Or maybe I'll have a more or less justified fear of a serious relationship, or even of women or the feminine, of feminine energy. This is a huge, broad topic. You could do an entire live stream just on this. Everything that has to do with indecision, emotional withdrawal, fear of relationships, fear of women. There are people who are afraid of relationships because they've had bad experiences. There are people who are afraid of relationships because they're afraid of being left. And there are people who are afraid of women because they had mothers who weren't entirely healthy, let's say, without going into specifics. There are people who are afraid of the feminine because they're afraid of their own feminine energy, which they see reflected in women. There are people who are emotionally closed off because they don't know how to be emotionally open. And all of this, in fact, especially affects women who are beings that in some way live through emotions more than men do, if we want to say that, even though it still needs to be proven. But apparently some people claim this. Let's say women are a bit more emotional, but men also experience emotions intensely. Maybe men are a bit more introverted, or women a bit more extroverted with their emotions, generally speaking. For all these reasons, a woman who doesn't feel this flow of exchange, openness, trust, giving, sharing, and so on, might distance herself if she doesn't perceive this kind of relationship.